Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, when we started looking at the stack of research for today, I have to be honest with you, I felt a really heavy weight. We're looking at Sudan. And usually when we talk about Sudan in the media or when you scroll through your feed, it's just this avalanche of tragedy. It's maps of Khartoum with smoke rising. It's lists of broken ceasefires.
It's generals in fatigues pointing fingers.
Exactly. And it's the sheer heartbreaking numbers of the displaced. It's overwhelming.
It is. And it's so kinetic.
Yeah.
It's all about movement, violence, and the immediate now. Who took which bridge today?
Yes, that's the perfect word for it, kinetic.
Yeah.
It feels like we're all watching a car crash in slow motion, frame by frame. We're analyzing the shattering glass and the crumpled metal, but we have absolutely no idea why the car was on that road to begin with, or who even built the engine. We get the what, the battles, the tragedy, and we get the who. We know the names. General Burhan, Hemedti, the RSF, the SAF. But I feel like we are just starving for the why.
And not just the superficial why, right? We aren't here to talk about why General X hates General Y this week. That's not the real question.
No.
We're here to ask, why does this state structure keep collapsing? Why is this cycle of violence so depressingly repetitive?
That is the mission today. So we are deliberately pivoting away from the breaking news ticker. We're going to step back from the smoke and look at the foundation. And to do that, we're diving into a fascinating, I would say arguably revolutionary intellectual project. We're looking at the work of the Sudanese thinker, Abdullahi Ali Ibrahim.
Right.
But we're doing it through a very specific, very sharp lens, a breakdown of his work by Dr. Nahid Alhassan, specifically her analysis titled From Atbara to Missouri.
And let me just say, this is not your standard political science lecture. This is something else entirely. Dr. Alhassan pulls concepts out of Ibrahim's work that are, well, they're startlingly original, they're literary, they're metaphorical, and yet they are incredibly precise.
I have to tease these right now because when I first read the notes, I genuinely thought there was a typo.
I know which one you're going to say.
We're going to talk about the Trojan Duck.
Yes. Not a horse, a duck.
A duck. And then we're going to talk about a psychological condition called Manichaean Delirium. It sounds like a heavy metal band.
It really does.
But it's actually terrifyingly relevant to modern politics. And finally, we're going to talk about broken pens and how a simple writing instrument, a pen, became a weapon of mass control.
And these sound abstract, maybe even a little whimsical, but I promise you, by the end of this hour, those three phrases, the duck, the delirium, and the pen, will explain the Sudanese crisis with more clarity than 1,000 hours of cable news.
And the premise we are working with today is a challenging one. It suggests that this war isn't just an accident. It isn't just bad luck or a few bad actors making terrible decisions.
Yeah, the argument is that the war is the explosion of a state structure, a laboratory, essentially, that was designed historically and bureaucratically to produce exactly this kind of disaster.
A laboratory for disaster. That's a powerful image.
That's the key shift in thinking we need to make. We have to move from seeing the state as the victim of the war to seeing the state as the factory that manufactured it.
So let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
If we want to understand this theory, this blueprint for the machine, we have to understand the man who drew it, who is Abdullahi Ali Ibrahim. When I hear intellectual project, my mind instinctively pictures someone in an ivory tower.
Sure.
Maybe in a university in Khartoum or London, surrounded by dusty books, totally disconnected from the reality on the street.
Yeah.
Is that who we're dealing with here?
Not at all. In fact, that is the very first point Dr. Nahid Alhassan makes in her analysis. You cannot separate the theory from the man's trajectory. His life is the method, and she calls it From Atbara to Missouri.
Yeah. Missouri, I'm assuming, is where he ended up in academia.
Yeah.
But Atbara, that's the city in northern Sudan, right?
Yeah.
The railway city.
It is the railway city. In the mid-20th century, Atbara was the headquarters of the Sudan Railways. It was known as the City of Iron and Fire. It was the industrial heart of the entire country. And this is absolutely crucial. Abdullahi Ali Ibrahim didn't learn his politics in a quiet library reading textbooks. He learned it as a living, breathing structure in the railway workshops of Atbara.
Okay, let's pause there and really paint the picture for everyone. Why is a railway workshop a political school? I mean, I think of it as a place where you fix engines, where it's greasy and loud, not a place where you learn statecraft.
Well, imagine a massive industrial complex in, say, the 1940s or 50s. It's hot, it's loud, there is steam and grinding metal everywhere. But it is also hyper-organized. The railway workshop was a mini-state.
A mini-state.
On one side, you had the colonial administration, the British managers running the schedule, the logistics, the top-down hierarchy, they were the government. On the other side, you had the trade unions, the Sudanese workers, organizing themselves, negotiating, pushing back.
So it was this constant collision zone between the rulers and the workers.
Or, more accurately, a negotiation zone. This is the key insight Ibrahim picked up. In that workshop, the working class wasn't some abstract concept that Karl Marx wrote about in a book in the British Library. It was a lived reality. These workers were incredibly disciplined, they ran the trains on time, they understood hierarchy and order, but, and this is the important part, they also understood solidarity.
They knew how to push back. They knew their own power.
Exactly. They knew the limits of the possible. That's a phrase that comes up. They knew how far they could push the administration. They knew how to negotiate with power. Dr. Alhassan uses this fantastic phrase, knowledge production. The workers weren't just tightening bolts on a locomotive. They were producing political knowledge. They were creating their own systems of meaning, their own internal order, their own methods for handling conflict.
So growing up in that environment, or just being part of it, must have inoculated Ibrahim against a very specific kind of elitism.
Precisely. It vaccinated him against the idea that the people, the masses, are just these passive, ignorant sheep waiting to be led by an educated elite from the capital. He saw firsthand that the common worker, the guy with grease on his hands, possessed a sophisticated, practical political intelligence.
He saw that they were actually capable of governing themselves.
Because he saw them running the railway, the most complex piece of infrastructure in the country. That became a fundamental building block for his entire way of thinking. He learned to respect the intelligence of the average person from the very beginning.
But then the story takes a turn. He moves from the industrial noise of Atbara to the silence of the desert. He goes to study the Kababish tribe.
Right, and this is what Dr. Alhassan calls the anthropological shift. This is where his methodology really crystallizes. He goes to study the Kababish, a nomadic Arab tribe in the west of the country. Now, to understand how radical this was, you have to understand the context of the time. The traditional modernist researcher, the typical academic of that era, would go into a tribe with a very, very specific attitude.
I think I can guess. It's the pith helmet attitude, right?
Yeah.
I am the smart scientist from the city. You are my primitive subjects. I will observe you, write down your quaint customs, and then I will go back and explain you to the civilized world.
Exactly. It's a completely vertical relationship, the observer and the observed, the knower and the known. It's extractive. You go there to extract data from the people like you extract gold from the ground. But Ibrahim received a piece of advice from a mentor, a man named Hassan Najila, that completely changed his life. Najila told him simply, integrate among them to succeed.
Integrate, not observe, not study.
Right. A totally different posture. So Ibrahim goes to the Kababish not as a superior with a clipboard, but as a student. And there, living with them, he has this profound aha moment. He realizes that these people do not need him to give their lives meaning. They are not waiting around for a professor from Khartoum to come and explain their own existence to them.
They already have it figured out. They're not raw material.
They have a complete functioning interpretive system. That's the academic term for it. They have their own poetry that carries their history better than any textbook ever could. They have their own complex, unwritten legal codes for resolving incredibly complicated conflicts over water rights or grazing paths.
I remember reading in the notes about something called the politics of lunch.
Yes. The politics of lunch. I love that detail. He observed these incredibly sophisticated social rules about who eats where, when, and with whom, which reinforces their entire social order without anyone ever writing it down. It showed him that politics isn't just what happens in a parliament building, it's woven into the very fabric of daily life.
It's in every interaction.
Every single one. And Dr. Alhassan calls this shift in Ibrahim's thinking redistributing the authority of interpretation.
That's a bit of a mouthful, but it sounds really important. Let's unpack that. Redistributing the authority of interpretation.
It means taking the authority to explain reality away from the elite academics, the politicians, the generals, and giving it back to the people who are actually living that reality. It's a radical act of intellectual humility.
So the intellectual's job changes. You're no longer the guardian of the truth.
Right. You're not the one who stands at the gate and tells everyone what is what.
Instead, you become, what was the phrase? A historian among us.
A historian among us, standing in the crowd, not on the balcony looking down. And this is epistemic humility. It's the profound realization that your fancy degree doesn't mean you know more about life, about survival, about politics, than the nomad or the railway worker. And this is vital because the entire tragedy of the modern Sudanese state, the deep structural reason we are seeing this war, is that the people who have been running the state never had this humility.
They never saw the people as partners.
They saw them as raw material to be molded, as a problem to be solved, as subjects to be governed.
Okay, so we have the man and the method. We have a thinker who respects the lived reality of the people, whether they are in the industrial workshop or the open desert. Now let's bring it home. Let's pivot to the crisis. We're watching Sudan tear itself apart. How does this history, this entire philosophy of Atbara to Missouri, explain the horrific violence we are seeing on our screens today?
Well, this brings us to the second major theme of our deep dive, this idea of structure over agency, or as I like to think of it, the laboratory of disaster.
Structure over agency. We hear this phrase in sociology, but let's apply it directly to the war. Usually when we talk about this conflict, we talk about agency. We say General Burhan did this or Hemeti did that. We blame the individuals.
And let's be absolutely clear. They are responsible for their actions. This isn't about letting anyone off the hook. But Ibrahim's argument, as channeled by Dr. Alhassan, is that if you focus only on the actors, you are missing the script. You're watching a puppet show and getting angry at the puppets while completely ignoring the strings, the stage, and the person pulling them.
So the war is not just the fault of the specific individuals fighting today.
No. The war is the inevitable explosion of a laboratory, which is the state itself, that was meticulously designed to produce disaster. The actor, whether it's a general or a politician, is a product of the structure. The generals are the symptoms. The disease is the very structure of the Sudanese state.
So let's walk into this laboratory. What does it look like? What are the chemicals on the shelves? What makes it so inherently dangerous?
It's what Ibrahim calls the inherited state. Think back to 1956, Independence Day. The British flag comes down, the new Sudanese flag goes up. The national elite, the educated class, mostly from the riverine center of the country, take their seats in the government offices in Khartoum. But they didn't dismantle the machine the British had built. They just learned how to operate it.
And that machine was never designed for democratic service. It was designed for colonial control.
Precisely. It was designed to rule, not to represent. Dr. Alhassan's analysis identifies 3 core pillars of this flawed structure that make conflict not just possible, but inevitable.
Okay, let's go through them one by one. Pillar number 1.
Cultural centralization. The state was designed from day one to have a very strong, dominant center Khartoum and the riverine areas that dictates what the culture of the country is. It basically says, to be truly Sudanese is to be this. And this usually meant being Arab, Muslim, and speaking Arabic in a certain educated way.
But Sudan is one of those diverse countries on earth. You have hundreds of languages, ethnicities, different religious practices.
Right. So if the center acts like a sun, shining its one specific cultural light, everyone else is automatically cast into shadow. The peripheries, the south, which eventually broke away, the west in Darfur, the east, the Nuba Mountains, they're all marginalized. Their cultures are seen as secondary, as folklore, not as part of the national identity.
This creates immediate friction. You're essentially telling millions of your own citizens that they don't quite fit the official definition of their own country.
Which explains why almost every single major war in Sudan's history has been, at its root, a rebellion of the periphery against the center. It's structural. It's built into the design.
Okay, that's pillar 1, cultural centralization. What's the second pillar of the laboratory?
Pillar number 2 is legal duality and resource distribution. The British set up a system where laws were different for different areas. Some places were under direct rule, others under native administration. But more importantly, the entire economy was designed to suck resources from the edges and bring them to the center.
It's an extractive model.
Purely extractive. Cotton from the Gezira scheme, gum Arabic from Kordofan, gold from the peripheries, livestock from Darfur. All of that wealth moves from the regions to Khartoum, where it's processed, exported, and where the profits accumulate. So you have a structural engine of inequality. It wasn't just bad luck that Darfur or the Blue Nile regions were underdeveloped. The system was working as intended to feed the center.
Wow. That is a chilling way to put it. Poverty wasn't a bug in the system, it was a feature.
It was a core feature of the design, and the third pillar, which ties it all together, is the administrative mentality. The state bureaucracy wasn't built to serve the people. It was built to control them, to police them, to manage them. It sees the citizen not as a stakeholder, but as a problem to be contained.
So let's put these 3 things together in our laboratory.
Yeah.
You have a culture that excludes you, an economy that robs you, And a bureaucracy that polices you.
You're mixing nitroglycerin, shaking it vigorously, and screwing the lid on as tight as you can.
And eventually, it blows up.
And that is the current war. It is the laboratory finally completely exploding. All those historical pressures have come to a head. And this is why Dr. Alhassan argues, based on Ibrahim's work, that simply changing the agency, swapping out the generals, holding an election with the same old parties, it won't stop the war. Not in the long run.
Because you're just putting a new driver in a car that is structurally designed to crash.
Exactly. And this gets back to that crucial point about accountability. You asked earlier, does saying it's the structure let the criminals off the hook? Dr. Alhassan says, no. It expands the scope of accountability. It means we have to hold the history accountable. We have to put the machine itself on trial.
We have to dismantle the laboratory.
You have to. Reform requires dismantling the very mechanisms of the state. The monopoly on violence held by the center, the extreme centralization, the way resources are hoarded and distributed. If you don't break the machine will just keep producing new wars, new generals, and new tragedies. It's what it was built to do.
This idea, the administrative mentality, this obsession with control, it leads us directly to one of the most cryptic and fascinating concepts in this whole deep dive. We've talked about the laboratory, now we have to talk about the tools inside it. Specifically, the pen.
Yes. Broken pens.
Yeah.
Or in the original Arabic, kasr al-qalam.
When I first saw this in the outline, my immediate thought was, okay, is this about censorship? The state breaking the journalist's pen so they can't write the truth.
It's a natural assumption, but it's actually much deeper and, in a way, more insidious than that. In this context, the pen is a symbol of colonial and administrative power. It is the bureaucratic pen. It represents the power to classify.
Okay, let's go back to that colonial administrator, the one who arrives in Sudan. The country is vast, it's complex, it's a mosaic of different peoples. He doesn't speak the languages. How on earth does he begin to rule?
He needs a map, but not just a geographical map of rivers and mountains. He needs a human map, a social map. He needs to know who to tax, who to draft into the army, who is the designated leader responsible for this particular patch of land. So he pulls out his pen and starts creating categories.
He starts putting people into neat little boxes.
He literally writes it down in a ledger. You are tribe X, you live here, this is your leader. But here's the fundamental problem. In reality, in history, Sudanese communities were incredibly fluid. They moved, they were dynamic.
Many were nomads, they traveled with the seasons.
And they intermarried, they formed alliances. A family might speak one language at home and a different one at the market. A group might ally with one tribe in the dry season and a completely different one in the wet season. Identity was a living, breathing, constantly shifting organism.
So the reality on the ground was fluid, but the record in the book was static. It was frozen.
Exactly. This is where Ibrahim makes a crucial distinction between two types of identity. There is record identity and there is reality identity.
Let's define them clearly for everyone.
Record identity is the creature of the pen. It is rigid. It is what is written in the government file on your identity card. You are a kababish. You are a fur. It is frozen in time, a snapshot taken by a bureaucrat. Reality identity, on the other hand, is historical. It's based on interaction, on living together, on the beautiful messiness of real life. It changes over generations.
The tragedy, I'm guessing, is that for the state, the map became more real than the territory.
For the state, the map is the territory. And this is the core tragedy of the post-colonial era. When the colonizers left in '56, the new national elite kept the pen. They didn't look at these colonial files and say, hey, these categories are artificial, they don't reflect our complex reality, let's get rid of them.
No, they said this is a great way to control people.
They internalized the colonial logic. It was an incredibly useful tool. They continued to govern by these rigid, frozen classifications. And this is the moment where it turns violent. When you categorize people like that, when you freeze them in administrative amber, political conflict inevitably transforms into identity conflict.
How does that transition happen? Walk me through that.
Well, think about it. If the state distributes resources or political power or even just recognition based on these boxes, if it treats me primarily as a member of Tribe A and it gives land or jobs to Tribe B because they are in the record as being loyal or more advanced, then when I fight back, I'm no longer fighting for better health care or more schools for my village.
You're fighting for the survival of your box. You're fighting as Tribe A.
Exactly. My very identity becomes the battleground. People start fighting over the labels in the record rather than their shared reality on the ground. The pen literally created the battle lines. We are seeing people killing each other today over categories that were, in some cases, invented by a British district commissioner 80 years ago to make tax collection easier.
It's just devastating when you put it like that. It makes the violence feel so profoundly manufactured, so artificial.
It is manufactured. The conflict is a product of the filing cabinet. And that is why Ibrahim's radical solution is to call for breaking the pen.
What does that mean practically? I mean, we live in a modern world. We can't just stop writing things down. States need records.
Of course, it doesn't mean burning the archives. It means a methodological revolution. It means decoupling knowledge from control. The state needs to stop defining its people by these bureaucratic boxes. It has to recognize identity as a living historical organism, not a fixed category. The purpose of the pen should be to record reality, not to create it.
So breaking the pen is about liberating identity from the state's files. It's about the state finally saying, you are not just what we wrote about you in our ledger. You are a complex human being with multiple affiliations, and you have rights as a citizen, period.
Exactly. As long as the state continues to see its citizens as a collection of static categories to be managed and controlled, it will produce violence. To stop the war, you have to break the pen that drew the battle lines in the first place.
Okay, so we have the laboratory that extracts resources and creates inequality. We have the pen that freezes identity and creates battle lines. But there's a third component here. It's a psychological one. The machine needs software to run. And that software is what Dr. Alhassan, interpreting Ibrahim, calls Manichaean Delirium.
Alhassan al-Manawi. This is perhaps the darkest and most difficult part of the analysis because it explains the sheer ferocity of the conflict, the absolute refusal to compromise.
Let's break down the word Manichaean. This comes from an old religion, right? Manichaeism.
Yes, an ancient Persian religion. The core idea of Manichaeism is a radical dualistic worldview. The entire universe is a cosmic battleground between two opposing forces, absolute light and absolute darkness. Absolute good versus absolute evil. There is no gray area. There's no middle ground. Everything is one or the other.
And Ibrahim takes this ancient religious concept and applies it to the modern Sudanese political mind.
He argues that this is the software running in the minds of the Sudanese elite and the state apparatus they control. It's a delirium, a political hallucination that completely eliminates the middle ground. It forces the world into a rigid binary structure.
How does this play out in practice? What does that look like on the ground in Sudan?
It manifests as a series of rigid, non-negotiable binaries, Arab versus African, tradition versus modernity, the civilized center versus the barbaric periphery, the believer versus the infidel. And in politics, it becomes the ultimate binary. Us, who represent pure good, versus them, who are the embodiment of pure evil.
I can immediately see how that destroys any possibility of compromise. You don't negotiate with absolute evil.
You can't. If my political opponent is just wrong, we can debate, we can argue, we might even find a way to split the difference. But if my opponent is the literal incarnation of evil, if he represents darkness, then my only moral duty is to destroy him. It turns a political disagreement into an existential holy war.
This explains so much about why the ceasefires never hold. You can't make a lasting peace with the devil.
You can't. And Dr. Alhassan points out that language itself became a weapon in this delirium, specifically the Arabic language.
How so? In what way?
Arabic wasn't just used as a tool to communicate. It was weaponized as a standard of purity. It became a gatekeeper. If you didn't speak the right kind of Arabic, the eloquent literary Arabic of the educated center, or if you weren't culturally Arab enough, according to the elite's narrow definition, you were cast into the darkness. You were backward. You were African in a derogatory sense. You were part of the problem.
So language became another tool of exclusion. It reinforced that us versus them mentality at the most basic level of communication.
It blinded the elite to the actual complexity of their own country. They couldn't manage diversity because their mental model only allowed for two opposing camps. It's a cognitive trap. In their minds, they created a country of two Sudans, the good, pure, modern Arab Sudan, which was them, and the bad, impure, backward African Sudan, which was everyone else.
It's a psychological prison. You have a state structure that freezes people into warring tribes with the pen. And then you have a mental state that demonizes anyone who isn't in your tribe. It's a perfect recipe for endless civil war. It feels, I have to say, it feels hopeless. It feels like a trap that's impossible to escape because the trap is inside their own heads.
And if we stopped the analysis right here, it would be utterly hopeless. It would just be a perfect, self-perpetuating tragedy with no exit. But this is where Abdullahi Ibrahim's genius really shines, and where Dr. Alhassan's analysis pivots to something incredibly resilient and, dare I say, optimistic. We have to talk about the Trojan Duck.
I have been waiting for this. The Trojan Duck. It still sounds like a character from a children's book, not a serious political theory. Please explain.
It does, doesn't it? But its simplicity is its brilliance. Okay, so we all know the story of the Trojan horse.
Of course, the Greek myth. They build a giant wooden horse, a bunch of soldiers hide inside, they trick the Trojans into dragging it into their walled city, then they jump out at night, open the gates for the rest of the army, and slaughter everyone. It's a raid, a conquest.
Right. And what are the key characteristics of the horse? It is violent. It is a trick. It is top-down. It smashes through walls. Ibrahim argues that for decades we have had the wrong view of how modernity operates in a place like Sudan. We thought modernity tried to come in like a Trojan horse.
Meaning the state tried to force it on people from above, decrees from the capital saying, you will now be modern.
Yes, big state-led development projects, forcing people to settle, forcing them to abandon their backward ways. We thought it was this violent conquest of the traditional by the modern, the Manichaean battle playing out.
But Ibrahim says that's not what actually happened.
He says, look closer, look at what people actually do. Modernity didn't smash down the walls of society, it leaked into society. Like a duck.
Okay, why a duck? What's the metaphor here?
Think about a duck for a second. What's its key feature? It is amphibious. It moves smoothly between two different worlds, the land and the water. It's quiet. It doesn't make a lot of ideological clamor, as he puts it. It just belongs in both worlds simultaneously. Ibrahim envisions modernity in Sudan as a Trojan duck. It entered the social fabric quietly through daily life without all the noise and violence of the Trojan horse.
So instead of a violent conquest from the top, it was a quiet, pragmatic infiltration from the bottom.
It was a leakage. And importantly, it was driven from below, not from above. This is his concept of modernity from below. It's about how ordinary people engage with new things.
Can you give me a concrete example of this duck in action? Try to picture it.
Let's go right back to our railway worker in Atbara. The British administration brought the trains, the schedules, the technology. That's the modern hardware. The Trojan horse approach would be to say the workers must become like the British. But that's not what happened. The workers didn't just passively accept the British rules, they formed trade unions.
Which is itself a modern concept, a modern form of organization.
Exactly, but they indigenized it. They took this modern tool, the union, and used it to negotiate within their own cultural context for their own goals. They used the duck to swim in the waters of colonial rule without drowning. They didn't become British, they became modern Sudanese workers, a new hybrid thing.
They took the tool and made it their own. They adapted it.
Or look at the Bedouin example he uses. A Bedouin in the desert might learn to read, or start using a truck instead of a camel for transport, or use a mobile phone to track market prices for his livestock. Now, a top-down Manichaean view, the view from the capital, might say, oh, look, he is abandoning his authentic culture. He is becoming westernized. Tradition is losing.
But the duck view says...
The duck view says, no, he is adapting. He's being pragmatic. He's using this new tool to survive and thrive within his own nomadic logic. He's still a Bedouin. He's just a Bedouin with a truck and a phone. The technology serves his culture. It doesn't erase it.
It's not a replacement. It's an addition. It's pragmatic.
It is wildly pragmatic. And this, for Ibrahim, is the hidden genius and resilience of the Sudanese people. Society is not a passive victim or some lump of raw material just waiting for the state to come and mold it. Society absorbs modernity, it hybridizes it, and it reproduces it on its own terms for its own purposes.
I love that term, hybridized. It's so powerful because it implies a mixture, a new creation. And it completely challenges that Manichaean delirium we were just talking about.
Yes, that is the direct connection. The delirium of the elite says you must be either traditional or modern. You must be Arab or African. The duck, the lived reality of the people, says, why? I can be both. I can move between land and water. I can be a Bedouin with a smartphone. I can be a railway worker who still maintains his tribal roots and obligations. The duck represents the negotiation that ordinary people do every single day just to survive and make sense of their world.
So, if I'm getting this right, while the elites are up in their tower in Khartoum, suffering from Manichaean delirium and trying to stab each other with these broken pens of classification, the ordinary people are down on the ground, just getting on with it, acting like Trojan ducks, adapting, surviving, mixing things up in ways the state can't even comprehend.
That is the picture exactly. And Dr. Alhassan's analysis suggests that this is where the hope lies. The state is rigid. The society is fluid. The state is a machine of death. The society is an organism of survival.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. We have a crisis in Sudan. We've looked at the roots through this incredible intellectual framework. We see a laboratory built to fail, that inherited colonial state. We see the broken pens, the bureaucratic obsession with freezing identity into conflict. We see Manichaean delirium, the psychological inability of the elite to compromise. And then finally, we see the Trojan Duck, the quiet, persistent resilience and adaptability of the people themselves.
That's the map of the crisis laid out.
Yeah.
The diagnosis.
So then, what is the path forward? If we follow Dr. Nahid Alhassan's reading of Ibrahim, how do we get out of this burning laboratory? What's the prescription?
The solution is threefold, and it maps directly onto the problems we've just identified. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it is clear.
Okay, lay it out for us. Step one.
Structural reform. You have to start dismantling the laboratory. You cannot just swap the generals or shuffle the cabinet ministers. You have to fundamentally change the centralized, extractive nature of the state. You have to reverse the flow of power and resources. You need a state that serves the margins, not just exploits them for the benefit of the center.
That's a huge task.
Okay. Step two. Breaking the pen. The administration must consciously and deliberately stop using these rigid, inherited categories to rule people. You need a new social contract based on equal citizenship rights, not on tribal labels in a colonial-era file. You have to let identity be fluid and complex again, the way it is in reality.
And step three.
Epistemic humility. This goes all the way back to the beginning, to that lesson from the Kababish. The elite must stop preaching to the masses and start learning from them. They need to stop looking at the people as wrong or backward or a problem and realize that the people, the Trojan Ducks, have actually figured out how to reconcile tradition and modernity far better than the state ever has.
That is such a powerful message. It completely flips the script. Usually we think the educated leaders need to save the ignorant people. Here, the argument is that the people's way of life, their pragmatism, might be the only thing that can save the state from its own self-destructive delusions.
Exactly. The solution isn't going to be handed down from the top. It has to be built up from the bottom, from the wisdom of the ducks.
This has been incredibly heavy, but also incredibly illuminating. It really does change how I look at the news. When I see a headline about Sudan now, I'm not just going to see a battle between two armies. I'm going to see the friction of that inherited machinery grinding itself to pieces. We're going to see the ghosts of those broken pens at work.
And that's the whole goal of a deep dive like this, isn't it? To help us see the invisible structures that shape our headlines.
Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to mull over. We've covered a lot of ground, but is there one final question that this analysis leaves us with?
I think the most provocative question, the one that really sticks with you from Ibrahim's work, is this. If the current state is, as we've argued, a machine designed to produce war, and if the elites who run it are trapped in this debilitating hallucination of good versus evil, then is it possible that the only people capable of actually saving the country are the very ones the state has spent decades trying to classify, control, marginalize, and silence?
You mean the Ducks?
I mean the ducks. Is it possible that the ordinary grandmother in a village in Darfur, or the young activist on the street in Khartoum, or the tea seller in Port Sudan, that these people, operating with the quiet, pragmatic, hybrid logic of the Trojan Duck, actually understand the solution better than any general in a palace or any diplomat in a suit? And if that's true, why aren't we listening to them?
Why aren't we listening to the Ducks? That is a question worth chewing on for a long time. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of Abdullahi Ali Ibrahim and the brilliant analysis of Dr. Nahid Alhassan. It's a complex and painful topic, but we hope we've helped unpack it in a new way.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
As always, keep digging, keep questioning the structure, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.